All right, so some of this is maybe a little lengthy, me talking a lot. It is what it is, okay? So I want to start, first of all, with the concept of the word tarot. Nobody knows where the word comes from. If you read 1,000 books, all of which told you where the word tarot came from, they'd have copied their information from somebody else. Just get that one straight first. So that you can, yes, you can read a book on tarot. You can read one of my books on tarot. I don't give a shit if you don't, because it doesn't matter. Because mostly because it keeps moving. Everything keeps moving. Nothing is still. Okay, this is oceanic. What you're dealing with is weather. Tarot is weather. It's probably the closest word that explains what tarot is. Weather patterns. Okay, and all of us are meteorologists. That's first off. So let me take you on a bit of a journey, because I think it's really important to do this before we go into the understanding of the depths of tarot, which is going to be Kabbalah, and then we'll break it open from there. So I'm going to use the concept of a timeline, okay? I'm not going to ask you forgiveness. I'm just going to do it. Take the idea of the Bronze Age. Can we do that for a moment? The Bronze Age, we're in what's called the current era. The current era was based on it had to do with a financial association with the Romans. Some people think it's got to do with Christianity, and actually doesn't have to do with Christianity. It's based on a massive change of paradigm that occurred as a result of economics 2,000 approximate years ago. So a year zero was created. Now, that's pretty funny to the Chinese, and it's very, very funny to Jewish people, and to some people, for example, who don't even bother with whether it's a year, like people from every indigenous community throughout the world, the idea of a timeline is kind of silly. The idea of one thing expanding from another thing, that's not silly, but the idea of a timeline is, but we'll start somewhere. So 5,000 years ago, approximately, people were traveling from Ireland, which is where the copper came from, across from Ireland, the east coast of Ireland, around the Dublin area. They would cross across to Anglesey. From Anglesey, they would travel down the coastline to what is now Cornwall. That was at once upon a time called the tribal lands of the Dumnonia people. With me? And the Dumnonia mined tin, because bronze is made from tin and copper. You with me so far? Okay. So what happens at the very, very base of what's now known as Cornwall is a place called St. Michael's Mount. Just across the channel, which wasn't always there as a watery person, just across the channel is a place called Mont Saint-Michel. Same name, isn't it? Yes? Okay, cool. Mont Saint-Michel is it's almost like a guardian of a place called Karnak. Not the one in Egypt, by the way. We're talking about what's now known as modern day France, but it's still Karnak. And these are places you can track the standing stones. If you wanted to sort of map any of this information, it's well worth mapping, because as you map, what happens is that aspect, I don't know who it was that spoke earlier about the aspect, I guess, of the fact that it's in the background of the consciousness, okay? Even the fact that the kids have come up with the box before you have got the box. So the standing stones were navigational tools, are navigational tools, okay? But we'll get around, the whole thing is navigational. All of this is navigational. But so you've dug up your copper from Ireland, which wasn't called that. You've come across the very small body of water that's called the Irish Sea, and you've ended up on Anglesey. Anglesey is the modern day name for Mona. Everybody know what Mona is. Also called Inishmon, and it is known as the Isle of Druids. You can just keep that in your back of your memory banks. We'll get back to that's important in a minute. There's the Isle of Druids, and the word Druid is also called, it's also spelled D-R-U-I with a grada on the top. And anybody not knowing what a grada is, it's like a French acute. Okay, so it accentuates the last letter. So that's the Isle of Druids. It's not destroyed yet. We haven't got to that period of history. So from the Isle of Druids is the crossing across to the mainland of what's now called Britain, down to the place of the Dumnona tribe, which is where the tin is gathered. There's a bit of a parlay goes on there. Everybody has a bit of a party, gets together, hangs out for a little bit. Then they move across from St. Michael's Mount to Mont Saint Michel, from there to Carnac. They might hang out in Carnac for a while. Then they're going to cruise on all the way down what is now known as France, and they're going to come to a place that was called Massilia, and nowadays it's called Marseille. Yes, from Marseille they travel across, and in the meantime there's lots of cafes and bazaars and wonderful things to barter and share. And from Massilia they cross to Joppa. With me? And Joppa is the port that's not far away from Jerusalem. So we're in Palestine. Okay. From Joppa, they travel across land into Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is a gateway to the land of the Nabateans. And the land of the Nabateans, what's left of the land of the Nabateans is nowadays called Petra, on the border of Jordan and what was once called Galilee, okay, near the Dead Sea. So you're on that border. Petra is an ancient city. It's called the Rose Red City, and it's built underground, and there were incredible aquifers, lots and lots of water, a very advanced group of people called the Nabateans, and it was a big hub of commerce. Am I boring you, Lee? You awake? You're just leaning back there, going to fucking daylight savings. Can't stand it. So from the land of the Nabateans, that would have been a major trade center. But the land of the Nabateans, which we'll get to why they were wiped out in a minute, went from there onto what's called the Old Silk Road. And from the Old Silk Road, you travel across land. You travel across what's called the roof of the world, which is Tibet. You also access China. You also access the Rush, just called modern day Russia. You also access all the lands across the Bering Strait, and you can also access all the lands through to what's nowadays known as China. If you wanted to, of course, the Bering Strait's going to take you across to Alaska, which is going to take you down right through to South America and Peru, where you're going to get yourself a balsa wood raft, and you're going to head down through the Pacific Islands to Australia. So we organized with all that. What I'd like you to know is the Bronze Age lasted for an approximate, or so we know, approximate 2,000 years. Now, what happened around the year 65 BCE, and I can say around because these are just fucking calendar dates, around the year 65 BCE to around the year 53 of the Common Era, what occurred was that one little group of people, and I know there's a lot more, I can't just spread out across everything historically, so I'm going to stick with it a little bit. The Romans decided to bolster their financial base. To bolster their financial base, they had to take the Silk Road, you see. So they were quite determined. There was a lot of emperors, and the demise of those emperors is hilarious. If you want to ever look it up and you want to have a good laugh is what happens to every single emperor in Rome, because it's really fucking funny. Even their mothers murdered them. What they decided to do was to bolster their finances, and to bolster their finances, they've invaded two places simultaneously. One of them is Britain, the home of some of my ancestors, and the other place is Jerusalem. Okay, now let's just sit on this for a moment, because most people then get this blinkers, which you've got to be very careful with your blinkers, that in some way associates Jerusalem. Jerusalem is Yerushalem, or Yeru Shalom. And Yeru is city, Shalom is peace. Okay, you with me? So that just means city of peace. So it was a pretty peaceful place. But what's interesting is that outside of the walled city of Jerusalem was a place that was called the Forest of Asherah. Asherah. Might want to write that down just so you've got a point of reference. Now, if we can do a little bit of biblical stuff in here, and of course, the twistedly interesting biblical stuff is where you start saying why, and these questions are much more important than your answers, because with the questions we can speculate, with the answers we've trapped the wolf in a box, and we're not going to do that. Okay. But what's interesting is that in the book of Ezekiel, biblical text, is a whole sequence of sights or visions that this bloke has had. And if one didn't understand the concept of Kabbalah, one wouldn't know what he was seeing when he talks of sapphire thrones, for example. That's supposed to be a snare drum moment. What he was visualizing was Kabbalah, was the process of certain things, certain colors, certain things that represent certain sephirah on the tree, blah, blah, blah. But he's tripping. He's on Amanita muscaria. He's fed it to the fucking camels. They've pissed in his bucket. He's drunk that shit. And the use of Amanita muscaria is very well known throughout that region. And the other thing that was very well known was associated with what's called the hashishim. The hashishim, which did use hash, were the warrior caste of that particular region. Okay, so we all you with me so far? I'm not boring anybody? Okay, cool. So the temples of, they're called the temples of Asherah, which is really odd because of the word, but I'll leave it in there and you can sort of like just cross it off, cross it out, rub it out, do what you've got to do with it. This place was made, it was an oak grove. Some people speculate that it was a grove of cedars. It's also irrelevant though. Maybe it's not. But what's interesting, if I can just for a moment remind everybody of how short the distances between one place and another in Europe are. If you haven't been to Europe, you've got no idea. I got the shock of my life when I went there and I realized that everything, like I could drive across from London to Cornwall in 5 hours. And of course, for an Australian, that's nothing. For Europeans, I ended up getting lost in Reading, and the cop in the cop shop in Reading said, "You're doing what?" The idea of crossing the country, of course, was not applicable at all. So everything's close together. So to get from Dublin to Massilia probably would have taken about a week. To get from Massilia to Joppa, Jerusalem, would have taken a couple of hours maybe, on a fast horse. What's interesting is the temples of Asherah, or the Asherah grove. So we're back to Ezekiel. Ezekiel, in his vision, I don't know his prominence. I don't know whether he was Sanhedrin, whether he was a Pharisee, where he fits in, but whatever it was, he had enough oomph to be able to gather an army together, because in his vision, God said to him, which was Yahweh said to him, look, go to the groves of Asherah and just slaughter every man, woman, and child that reveres life in the Asherah grove, please. So Asherah does. He gets an army together. He goes off and he kills every man, woman, and child who are associated with the forests. Now, we may not be talking about humans. Bear that in mind. But we could be, what kind of decimation are we perhaps thinking about if we remove the concept of just people being involved in these stories? That's very important. It's like your box. You're just talking about my box, this, I did that, I did something else. What I'm asking is that perhaps this is nothing to do with us, but perhaps everything's to do with us. So he goes and slaughters, but the Asherah, the original tree of life, or Otzim, which is what this particular thing we're going to get onto today is all about. The original Otzim was called the Asherah tree. And the Asherah tree is your heritage. It's your parents, their parents, their parents, their parents. In most Indigenous communities, the knowledge of kinship systems is vast. Yes? That includes in certain religious ideologies like Judaism. They have a person who keeps a record of who's fucked who and who's related to who. It all interweaves like a tartan. You with me? Okay. So Ezekiel's gone and killed supposedly every man, woman, and child that's in the forest of Asherah, which is outside of Jerusalem. Now that's a little it reminds me of Rio Tinto. If you can bring it into today's ideology, it's just like we're looking at Rio Tinto and what Rio Tinto is doing in Western Australia at the moment to the environment. They're blasting these ancient caverns that have got these artworks in them that are approximately 70,000 years old, for example. They're just like, oops, sorry. Well, this is what happens still. And so I'm saying we're still 2,000 years in the past or 3,000 years in the so-called past. We're still there and the same thing is still happening. You with me so far? Okay. So Ezekiel has his vision. There's the oak forests. The oak forests, the people in the oak forests are also including the plant people and the animal people. I will mention that here. Then you've got Jerusalem itself. At the same time as what's happening in Jerusalem, exactly the same time, the diaspora in Jerusalem mirrors the diaspora in Britain. So that the slaughters and the massacres of Indigenous people occurred at the same time. And you also had to get put in line. Now, earlier, Danger, I think it was Danger, mentioned the cruciform shape. This is rather interesting. Because at the time of the Roman invasions of both Britain and Jerusalem, Rome decided that its major form of torture was to crucify people. So all the roads were lined with people who'd been crucified. They're with ropes, they're upside down, there's some sticks. It's a little bit like Vlad the Impaler doing his thing, but he got the trick from the Romans in the first place. All these crucifixions were taking place apparently all the way through to all along the road to Damascus. There was just all these cruel crosses, and all of these cruel crosses, none of which were necessarily cruciform shape, by the way. It didn't ever, who was slaughtered, it didn't matter. The only reason for crucifixion was sedition. Sedition. And I'm just going to break away a little bit for a second from this whole lead up to tarot, break away a little bit because of the oddness that all of you should be considering. I mean, how many people here had, probably half of you, that's a bit of an assumption, but I would assume half of you have had anything to do with Christianity or some variation of it. So just to say half of you have, and this makes a bit of sense. Okay. Sedition. Yes, somebody wrote sedition. Or someone spell it right. Thank you. So anybody in this fucking piece of folklore that's been passed down through as factual, that's called Christianity, in this piece of folklore, what happened is the man that they'd picked up named Yeshua, which is Yod He Shin Vav He, by the way, we'll get around to that in a minute. The moment you add Shin to a thing, you've added some tooth and claws and a bit of sort of like firepower, or a smoking gun to a word. We'll get back to that. This person was supposed to have been strung up or hung up or nailed up or whatever you want on a place called Golgotha, the Mount of Skulls, which was solid rock, by the way. You couldn't get a fucking cross in there if you tried. And it was done on private property, supposedly. And according to the folklore, there was a a cross on one side and a cross on the other side, and a thief was on each one. And one of the thieves asked Jesus to forgive him, and the other one didn't. With me on that? Except for the fact nobody ever crucified anybody for theft. They used to cut their hand off. That was left to the Sanhedrin. That wasn't taken up as any, the Romans didn't give a fuck about any crime whatsoever except sedition, because sedition said, do not challenge our might. That's all sedition is. John Howard, by the way, in Australia brought back the law of sedition in the 1990s. I don't know whether you knew that, as an illegality. So it became illegal to speak out against the government, and it's an imprisonable offence for the last 20 years. Okay, and if you didn't know that, it's well worth knowing. So anyway, we go back to this particular period of history when Rome's doing its thing, and it's destroying all the people in Britain, and it's destroying all the people in Jerusalem. Now, it comes through this historically as if in some way they're separate, and they're not separate. But this is a trade deal, to get me. So the tin, which comes from Cornwall, and the copper that comes from Ireland, making the bronze, is worth a lot of money. So it's equivalent, because at that stage historically, gold wasn't that big a deal. Okay, but bronze was. Most were Bronze Age to Iron Age tools. Yes, that's absolutely fantastic. But the trade routes between China and Ireland were well established when Rome decided that it was going to invade Jerusalem, when Rome decided that it was going to invade Britain. Now, note, it doesn't mention any of the other invaded places, but that's because they didn't have an historian with them who could write journals. So we don't know what happened to the other places. But when Jerusalem was invaded, we had a thing called the diaspora, and the diaspora ended up creating what's called terra nullius in Jerusalem. Everybody had to fuck off unless they followed the rules of the Romans. The same thing in Britain. If you fucked off or you died, unless you succumbed and became a client kingdom. And the people that were working with you were then brought into slavery and a feudal system. So we've got Jerusalem, we've got Britain. We can just leave Britain out of the thing for the moment. Now, when we get across to Jordan and the lands of Nabatea, that journey opens up that takes us across to Tibet, takes us across to China, takes us across to all the other countries. And trade has been going on a long, long time, but we are almost indoctrinated from a young age not to know this. We're indoctrinated from a young age to see events historically that come through school as separate, and they're not. These trade routes and the idea of what's called international free trade that's occurring at the moment is identical to what happened around the time 63 of the Common Era, or the Roman invasions of Jerusalem. Now, at the time of the invasions, there were several sects, and there was apparently a messiah on every corner. Oh, let me fill you in on that one. You probably, some people here have heard this. The word messiah, you know where it comes from? Anybody know where it comes from? I do. Is it important? Yes. The word Messiah. Yes, Ari.
Comes from the word messiah, which it means anointed.
No, incorrect. The word Messiah comes from the Egyptian word Mesa, which is the fat of the crocodile or the monitor lizard that was used to anoint a pharaoh to godhood.
Yeah, I knew it had to do with the crocodile fat for the anointing.
Yeah, but it's got to do with, that's it. So what you're talking about, the anointing, has nothing to do with it. The anointing in this particular instance, the Messiah is the product. The Christosing, which of course is the Greek word for anointing, that's where the word Christ comes from. Christosing, which is the anointing, that's different. It's not the same. That's a doing thing, not a noun.
Can you spell the word that the
Messiah? The Messiah is M-E-S-S-A-H, is the anglicization of that. Really doesn't matter. But it's the fat that was used. It's actually a monitor lizard, very large monitor lizard, and that was mixed in with things like spikenard that was worth a fucking fortune. Spikenard is lavender, French lavender. And the oil of spikenard was worth more than gold. And anybody wants to get a little off tangent here and look into the messianic legacies will notice that this is part of it because the woman with the alabaster jar, who was supposedly Miriam Magdalena, anointed this man in preparation for his initiation. But that was a very common form of initiation, still used today. It's not old at all. Okay, but that's beside the point. That's a little to the side. But what's interesting is that the diaspora of Jerusalem sent the main protagonists in our story in two directions. One group ends up in the Greco-Roman environment of the Mediterranean in Europe, which is where the dominant Roman hegemony is, and the other group disappeared in Iberia, modern-day Spain. With me? Okay. Mesa means inside in Greek, interestingly. It's not the same word, Artemis. Please don't do that. I'll just very momentarily, yeah, I just very momentarily go on. Be careful of word association like that because it'll get you into trouble. Somebody said to me at one stage in time, Tara, which is the main seat of the Irish kings being anointed, is spelled Tara, and therefore the Egyptian influence. She tried to tell me, she's an Egyptian scholar, that part of the word was Ra, associated with the sun god, and I said it's spelled Temhair. Stupid. So misinterpretations can occur. Mesa is different. It's the same as Mesa or Mesa in America, which of course is a ridge line. Yeah, so won't go there. All right, back to the story. So people go in two directions. One of the group was called Paulists, and they ended up in the Greco-Roman era or environment where the so-called deity, and we can get around to that later because that word's got to go as far as the idea of a Homo erectus has got to go, of any gender. There's no such thing. It's nothing to do with that. The so-called deity was Mithra. And Mithra, like Dionysus and like Osiris, was born in a stable to a virgin or born in a cave to a virgin. Okay, so this is a very old theme. And the old theme in this particular instance is the cave or the stable is this absolute womb. And the idea of a virgin was owned by no man. That's what the word means in Greek. So that in Jerusalem, for example, under the auspices of not only the Sadducees and the Sadducee and the even the Elohists and all the rest of it, the idea a woman had two marriages. The first one, she remained virgin, owned by no man, and that marriage would take place if she, in preface for maybe if she was fertile and she could get pregnant. And the marriage proper didn't take place until she was able to bear a child. Because the whole point of marriage was to do with procreation, had nothing to do with love. Hi, Victoria. You're looking very, very worried again, as you always do. I love that look. Okay, so when the dudes get to, and this is the Paulists, when the Paulists get to the Greco-Roman environment around the Mediterranean, in those regions, the only so-called, and I'm stumbling because I don't want to use words that could be misinterpreted. That's the only reason. You with me? The people in power, and that's a very dodgy way to put it, however I'm putting it there. The people in power were, for lack of a better word, worshippers or adherents of Mithra. Now, Mithra is called the god of war, just like Mars. That's bullshit. And in your time, if you can look for what it really is, that's important. But if you accept that Mithra was considered by the soldiers to be the god of war, then you're fucked. And I'd ask you not to be. So do your research. That's important. Okay. So when they got to Greco-Roman environments, which was the creme de la creme, that's where all the money was. It's like a little like, trying to think, Dubai, for example, comes to mind. Okay. when they got there and they found that all the money, they had to somehow turn around their little religion from the Mount of Sinai, which is a thunder god called Yahweh. They had to get it somehow accepted. So they created this legend, this story, came to be known as Christianity. And Christianity was implemented by way of a hostile sword. Let's be very clear about that. So the other group that disappeared went to Iberia, which is modern day Spain, and disappeared. Okay, I want to get rid of that chat box off to the side. There's no use to the moment. No, cancel. Okay, that's not working. Okay, disappeared. Now, nobody knows or knew that they were there. These are the other people who've run away from the conquerors. Yes, they disappeared. And they didn't raise them. Nobody knew that they were there historically until the 1300s. Now, the 1300s, 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries are very, very interesting, because by the time the 11th, 12th, and 1300s are established, Christianity is well and truly the religion du jour, okay? And it has blasted its way through massacre after massacre after massacre, because it got the ticks that it needed to be authorized. In the 1300s, and then of course the Inquisition goes down there, and what happens with the Inquisition? Of course, that's a power grab by the Northmen, which are the Normans. Of course, were not French. They came from the Nordic areas down through France, across to Britain, and took over all the homes and territories of the indigenous Britain, while the indigenous Britain were often saving their souls by going on a crusade to Jerusalem, and most of them died. When they came home, they didn't have their properties anymore. That's just a little beside. So the group that disappeared didn't raise themselves up again until the 1300s. And the person that raised their head up was a man named Moses de Leon. Please write that down. Moses de Leon. And Moses de Leon raised his head up from where he'd been hiding, or where the people had been hiding, with a book called the Zohar, which is translated through to Book of Splendors. Anybody who's interested can get also hold of anything by a person called Carlos Suarez. And the first section of that person's book, called the Moses de Leon, no, the spelling's wrong, but we'll get around to that. Sorry. The Zohar, which was the Book of Splendors, which was Kabbalah. Now, I'm talking to you, and I'm talking to you without you having to necessarily write down anything except certain points, because we have become very, very, very lazy as a people by using pen and paper. There's a very important reason that we haven't. Yes, thank you, that Luna. I think it is Leon. Insofar as most cultures that are indigenous, which have been wiped out by Christianity, have been cultures of orality. But this is why I'm talking to you instead of reading what I'm telling you from a book. Okay, I haven't put this in a book. I have taught this for decades, this information. Moses de Leon pops his head above the surface. He's got the Zohar in his hand, and the Zohar, the Book of Splendors, the Book of Splendors is this, which we're going to cover in a few minutes when I finish telling my story. Now, Moses de Leon began the process of introducing Kabbalah to the people of the so-called West. I want to hopefully tantalize you a little bit with this. The so-called West, which includes the Rosicrucians, the Masonic orders, all of the magical orders throughout the rest of Europe. That includes the understanding of architecture, the understanding of spatial reality and mathematics. All of this was introduced from Moses de Leon and his cohorts into the magical orders of Europe. And it's wound its way, and all the way through, of course, is the concept, which I'm not even going to get into today, but I could if I wanted to, of bloodlines. But the bloodline is the Asherah tree. So all these people get caught up in Bejan, Lincoln, and Lee, messianic legacies, and they get caught up in the whole Magdalenian conspiracy theories, etc. When they're not realizing what this theory and what this understanding is all about is the tree of life, is the Asherah tree that Ezekiel decided to destroy, that was associated specifically to the Druids. And I haven't got time today to go into the research that I've done that proves that the Druids and the people of the Asherah tree were having communication, except that several of the letters are very similar and the language is very similar. And that's what makes it odd. And that's what first started triggering my, I don't know, go back in 1982, the oddness of it started me researching and finding out what was the connection and understanding that the mysticism of the Asherah tree was a matrilineal lineage, because you always knew who your mother was, and you never necessarily knew who your father was. In difference to a patrilineal lineage, which was that which was demanded by a Greco-Roman hegemony, and also by the Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin hated women. And they didn't like women, for example, who wouldn't do what they were supposed to do. And that was lie down like Eve. Fuck Lilith. Lilith was going, get the fuck off me, you great big fat shit bag, and go fucking do something else. I'm busy here. I'm fishing in the Red Sea. Mind your own fucking business. But the word Eve, which is interesting because we have been recently just talking amongst us as a group about the so-called sin of Eve, which is still apparent today with the removal of children from their mothers if their mothers are single in many countries that I've just fought to get my freedom from. This goes back to apparently the sin of Eve. But did you know that the word Eve is the word Havah, H-A-V-A-H? Bearing in mind there are no vowels. H-A-V-A-H, write that down, please. Havah. And Havah translates through to one word and one word only, and that's life. With me so far? You following some of this patterning that I'm looking at? Okay, the patterning doesn't stop there. The fascinating thing that I came across recently, you do realize, of course, that the biblical New Testament was translated by a prick calling himself King James of Scotland, who translated the Greco-Roman texts of the Pentateuch or the Torah into English, and he called what was he called what was in the books paradise, he called it paradise Eden. You know that? You following me so far? Eden. Do you know what Eden is? It's a fucking river between the Irish Sea and the North Sea that goes past Edinburgh, which is Edinburgh, by the way, is the same word as Dunedin. You getting me? You following this? How is Edinburgh and Dunedin the same word? What's a borough and what's a dun? A dun is a fortress. It's a Celtic word for a fortress. A borough is an Anglo, so it's basically a Saxon word for a town. You with me? But both of them have the word Eden with them. So consequently, that fucked up bastard King James must have thought it was a pretty fucking wonderful river to name paradise after it, when he mistranslated the Pentateuch into the English Bible. He mistranslated all of it. I wanted to get this set up for you so that you understand that the system that I'm going to be teaching you or getting you to understand is not Jewish. The Jewish language came from Syriac, 22 letters, from Aleph through to Zayin. There's 22 letters. And this is where I've run into trouble with people that are purists and want to kill me because I'm teaching organic Kabbalah. Okay? It does not belong to anybody. There's no misappropriation here. This is just what Moses de Leon introduced to the West, and it is meant to be organic, and it has been set up to seem like a religious doctrinal system. So in most, when you go online, if you're looking up Kabbalah, you're going to be finding everything to be like, oh, it's so fucking holy, it's so fucking this, it's so fucking that, it's so fucking spiritual, it's so fucking sacred. Get over it, it's not. It's the veins in your arms. It's your bloodline, you understand? Every forest of beans starts with one fucking bean seed. You with me? And so you sitting in front of me, Victoria, because you've got you square in the middle of the fucking page here in my screen, you began trillions and trillions and billions and trillions and trillions and trillions and billions of trillions and trillions of years ago. And you may have been recognized as a mammal 5 million years ago. It's still the same seed. Patterns in the seed. Yes? Seed keeps moving, forest to forest to forest to forest. Okay. What's that from Leah? Okay. Right. Thanks, Leah. Excellent. So the Asherah tree, which was first mentioned, interestingly enough, in Sumer, I can backtrack you a little bit. Let's go a little bit. You've got Sumer, you've got Babylon. From Babylon, you go into Jerusalem. From Jerusalem, you go into Europe. From Europe, you go into Australia and so on. But basically, there's Egypt in there as well. Very few people here are from the Middle East. That wouldn't be a problem. One of my dear friends is from Kabul. And he's got 2 degrees in quantum physics, and we have these long conversations about Kabbalah because he knows also that this is an organic system. But it's been claimed and turned into a religion. Religion is when you stop asking questions, when you give the actual facts and say, you can't think beyond this. You must accept this doctrine as the truth and not question it. You with me? So that all of this is questionable. You do your research. Teach me something I don't already know. I'm fine with that. I'm happy with that. That's interesting. But what's interesting is that when the Romans also went to Britain, what Suetonius Paulinus and his troops did was figure out that the rebels were living in the Welsh hills. And he couldn't work out at all, because, I mean, Claudius was a fuckwit. Everybody knows Claudius was a fuckwit. He couldn't work out how the rebels in the hills were getting fed. And then he worked out one day when it's those bastard druids on Mona. So we've got to go and kill them all. So Suetonius Paulinus and his troops, the 47th Legion, headed to Mona and burnt down the entire forest and anybody and everybody in it. And they murdered as many people as they could. Julius Caesar's crew tried to go there beforehand, but the Menai stopped them. They couldn't cross the water because they were terrified of what they called the shadow women, who were all along the edges of the water, summoning the storms to come down and to drown the fucking troops, which they did. Okay. So Kabbalah was originally called the Asherah tree. Asherah is the same word with a twist as Hava, because Asherah also means life. So somewhere the idea of permaculture is really old, but includes us as a species. We're involved in the pattern of permaculture when we think of the Asherah tree. The Asherah tree is not, for example, is knowing that you don't go and pick that particular group of mushrooms and leave none, because if you leave none, the spores will not generate again in this when the season is correct. Okay, it's knowing what to plant when, and that includes ideas. That includes knowledge. So within this system that we're going to start to unfold today, it's 3:26. I'm running a bit behind. That's okay. It's fucking daylight saving. I wanted to give you this information beforehand so that you realize that this is organic. This is not based on any dogma. And it is not in the book Advanced Tarot. So it's just between us. Now, let's get back to the sort of the diagram. I did get you to, first of all, this is the thread, if you like, of the song line from Moses de Leon. And before Moses de Leon, back to Jerusalem. Before Jerusalem, back to the temples of Asherah, which were the forests that were burned down by Ezekiel, because let's not worry about whether people are LGBTQI or women, for goodness sakes, but they've all just got to die. They're not worth anything. They're not even worth the same amount as a goat. Okay, so we can afford to get rid of them. But are they actually talking about the forest, the Asherah, or are they talking about the survival mechanism of people who had the same thing before the Industrial Revolution, which was called common land? You with me so far? Do you know what common land is? Common land is the land that's available in an environment of forest where everybody can get their food. And isn't it interesting how the word common has been manipulated into a word that means less than important? Just be aware that that's what happens with the language of the conquerors. They will get you to think within the stratosphere of the way they want you to think. And this is what school does to people. It gets you to think in a certain way only. It doesn't allow you to spread out in the forest and get to know the whole of the creatures. You've got to stick to the path in a schooling system. Okay. And in the schooling system, of course, the whole idea of permaculture doesn't get taught. You're not taught to be makers and creators of boxes, the processes, the mathematics thereof. You're not taught that from the beginning. You're just taught to learn the math, not what it's for. You know, you have to sort of like spend 16 years learning the math before you perhaps potentially go to university and find out that it's got to do with atomic fusion and a bomb that gets dropped on someone like Hiroshima. So we can be manipulated and railroaded by these systems that have been in place for a minimum of 2,000 years. Yes, until you get out of your own fucking way and stop thinking you made the box. But the box in itself is a collaboration between you and life. A collaboration. I suggested a collaboration. Make a box. Okay. I didn't hold you up against a wall with a gun under your throat. Say or else. There's no threat inherent in it. I didn't give a shit if you made a box or not. I was interested in what you could feed me, what you could feed back, what you could feed to the group, what you could share around the group to get the whole group of all of us here interacting and interweaving in the patterns of recognition, yes, of possibilities, which is what tarot is. So you've got 78 cards in a pack of tarot. Involved in them, you've got a pack of tarot pack of cards is usually split up into two sections. Those two sections are called minor and major. Fuck that off to start with. Okay, we're not going to use the concept of better than and lesser than. But there are a specific group of pictograms that are known as the major arcanum. Just know that. There's 22 of them. Yeah? There are 22 letters associated with each one of those pictograms. There's a letter connected to each of the 22. With me? From Aleph through to Zayin, including Het and Sade. Don't think about it. Don't think about it yet. We'll get to that. But you've got 22 letters there. Those 22 letters, which are called the 22 Hebrew letters, came from Syriac. And they probably came from elsewhere before that, because we could be looking into the future, not the past. You know that, don't you? We've already established that. So we could be coming to understand what the hologramic knowledge or wisdom that the ancient people of the ancient future have left for us to discover, so that we can become who we're going to become 10,000 years from now. Following me so far? Is this meant to fuck your brain around? Yes. But so that you've got it in there to let it move, to give it some air, you understand, to give it a bit of space to break away from the way you thought you were going to learn. You're not going to learn that way here, because everybody's different, and knowing that gives you a freedom of breaking away from fixed ideology ever. You will never implement an ideology onto another person, and vice versa. If they try, you can calmly go, don't have to agree with it. And you also don't have to argue, because one of the things I learned a long time ago is if you're right, don't argue. Okay, you've got 22 letters. With this pattern, have you all drawn this pattern at some stage? You're going to need to. You're going to need to turn a page, please, and draw this pattern exactly sort of as it is now. I want to get to a certain point to sort of close up today. I'm sort of glad that we're on. Can I borrow your pen? Okay. I'm just going to start, because I don't want to be able to utilize my friend's pen all the way through. I'm going to I'll just do this. I'll just start. No, it's all cool. Here you go. Don't come back. I want to start out by, first of all, just drawing 3 lines. See how I've linked those 3 spheres? So what I'd like you to do then is to link this sphere and that sphere.
Straight?
Yep.
Oh,
Yep. And then from this sphere to that sphere. So I'll just.
And all those little mini dots in the middle, like?
Yeah, those little mini dots will matter. They will and they won't. There are a couple of people who've done this before with me, and they know how fucking funny I'm being. Sorry, it's not. So see what I've done there so far. I've done that little triangle shape, and then I've done a line that goes all the way through to this sphere here, which is the outside. So, because actually we're looking at this. So one could say, this is my gut, and I could say, this is my skin. Okay. Then what I've done here, if I was to the, I mean, I'll continue. So down to the side, I'll put a line, I line those ones up on the side. Needing a pen? I can look at it now. Okay. And then when you've lined those ones up on the side, just bring the lines down to that little one there. And then those ones that are at the bottom there, just bring them down to the very bottom one. Okay, we're with me so far? Then you're going to draw a line from this little round circle to the one in the middle there. And from that little round circle to the one in the middle there. Then you're going to draw a line from that little round circle there to the one in the middle. And from that little round circle to the one in the middle. Then you're going to draw a line from that circle way up the top there to the one in the middle. And from that other one, from way up the top there to the one in the middle. With me so far? Anybody having problems? No? Okay. Then you're going to draw a line across there. And then you're going to draw a line across there. Okay? So that's basically your pattern. Now, what I'd like you to do with those lines, if you wouldn't mind, is to count them. And start, when you've counted them, start telling me how many there are. Thanks, Danger, yes. Thanks, Nishka, yes. Thanks, Ari, yes. Thanks, Keke, yes. Lily, yes. Rebecca, you've got 2. You might have missed something. Sharon, yes. Gabrielle, yes. Victoria, yes. Will, yes. Kristen, yes. Katarina, yes. Rebecca, yes. Okay, cool. So looking pretty much like you've all got the number 22. Okay, cool. No, may I have that sheet back? So if you've got 22 of them, and then you've got, if you add the 22 of them, how many of these circles have you got? Not included the dotty one at this stage. Ten, yep, 10, thank you, 10. 10, yep, good, 10, thank you. Okay, so if you add the 10 to the 22, you've got 32, yes? But if we add a little, the dotty one that's there and not there, it makes a 33rd one, yes? A potential 33rd one. Because it's dotty, it's not filled in, it's dotted. So it's 20 potential 33rd one. So what you've got, you're with me so far. You're all looking down, you're busy there with your pens and paper. What you've got is 22 letters attached to 10 Sephiroth, which is 32, with a potential 11th Sephiroth, which is that one that's dotted, which makes 33. So numerologically, we're going to be hitting 22, 11, 22, and 33. We get onto numerology next week. We're all, every bit of this is all woven together in a tapestry. That's the tree of life. Okay, so each one of those 22 lines that link up each of those circles is what is temporarily called the major arcanum. They're the pictographs. There's 22 of them. Now, there is one little extra bit to add to this before we get even further. We're going actually, because Ari, you've got the hold on the host, I actually can't type anything on the side, which you probably can do. So can you be ready with your typing skills? So this particular sphere here, which is my skin, is called Malkut. M-A-L-K-U-T-H. TH is pronounced T. Malkut, not Malkut or Malkut. It's Malkut. If I go under the dermis a little bit, deeper into my body, this next circle is called Yesud. Y-E-S-O-D. Ari is putting them in the side for you to look at. If I move in the direction of a snake, I'm going to serpent my way through this. I move up here through there into that next one across there on what seems to be the left. That's called hood, H-O-D. I cruise across that line there. The next circle is called Netzach, N-E-T-Z-A-C-H. If I cruise up then through the middle one that I'm looking at in this particular instance, which could be my probably the best place is my duodenal cap. The duodenal cap is at the very top of your stomach, yes. But about that, it's called Tiferet, T-I-P-H-A-R-E-T-H. P-H is, I said, fuck you. Firmament. Again, interestingly enough, even though it's spelled T-I-P-H-E-R-E-T-H, can you please make a note to yourself that the original T is not tet, T-E-T-H. It is actually tov, T-A-U. If Keke has got a PNG diagram, please remove it. Keke, please remove that diagram, the PNG file. You there, darling?
I don't know how to remove it.
Okay, I'll write.
It just had the words you said. That's what
I just want you to not do that. This is an oral class. You are to learn this. If you go looking it up, you will get distracted. Please don't do that. Please do. Thank you. If it can be removed, please remove it. If there's any way of removing that, I don't know how. Okay. If anybody wants to look at it, they're free to do so. It's not my part. But anyway, where am I? So Tiferet, T-I-P-H-A-R-E-T-H, bearing in mind that there are no vowels. But the original letter that looks like a T is not tet, T-E-T-H. It is tov, T-A-U. And T-A-U pronounced tov is th. Yes? But it can also be pronounced t if it's at the beginning of a word. That gets a bit complicated at this stage. We can uncomplicate that with familiarity. Okay, moving across in the serpent shape, we come to this particular circle here. This circle is pronounced Gevurah, but is spelled G-E-B-U-R-A-H. But a B in the middle of the word is pronounced V. So it's Gevurah, Gevurah. From Gevurah, we travel across this line here to this particular circle, and that circle is called Chesed, C-H-E-S-E-D. What you probably noticed so far, which I want to get a little bit, we've gone from here, we followed this path to here, we followed that path to here, we followed that path to here, we followed that path to Tiferet, we followed that path to Gevurah, we followed that path to Chesed. Now, the only place on this diagram where there is no path we're on now, we're going across here without there being a path to this particular circle up the top here called Binah, B-I-N-A-H. So that's the only part of this diagram that does not have one of those 22 paths. You with me? And this is going to be very important when we get around to prophecy, because this is where we are now, as far as recognizable history goes. And there we go across that path to that particular circle there, which is called Chesed, sorry, Chokmah, C-H-O-K-M-A-H. Chokmah is also called the sphere of the zodiac. And it is also called the place of Hava. H-A-V-A-H, which all, as we were discussed earlier, is called Eve. Some of this is going to start making sense. It's going to start clicking into place. A couple of weeks, it starts clicking into place. We move across, follow a path, and there, the very, very heart, or the inside of the seed, or the essence of the seed, and that essence of the seed is Keter. K-E-T-H-E-R. This little spotty bit in the middle is known as Da'at, D-A'-apostrophe-A-T-H. Da'at. D, it's up on the board there, D-A'-apostrophe-A-T-H. And what the apostrophe is to make certain that you don't mistake the double A. The double A in this language is Oyin, which is a very different letter. The double A is two separate olives. So this actually means, that last word, Da'at, means first door, first earth. I hope I just blew your minds. So it's a possibility because it's not a known thing. It never sits there solid. It's a possibility. Okay. Can you repeat that? Yes, Luna, it is. It's Dolet is door. Aleph is one or first. Aleph is one or first. Tov is TH, which is earth, which is associated geometrically with the number 40. Is this all making sense? No, I'm chucking all the jigsaw pieces in the middle, and you've got the lid of the box. You'll have the lid of the box, and then you can start to put it all together. But if I don't give you all the information at this stage in time, you'll get terribly lost because it'll be set out like a school, and that's not how this works. Okay. So the art is there and not there, which means that it's all possible potentials. Okay, now let's just relax for a moment. And I just want to take you a little bit further before we actually finish for the day. I want you to look at Malkut again and understand that Malkut is every possible element. That which we know and that which we don't know. And in this particular moment, just for the sake of it, we're going to pull on the Greek elements of earth, air, fire, and water. Where in actual fact, when you get into elements, there's hundreds of them. But of course, Diogenes didn't necessarily know that at the time. Aristotle did, but then again, Diogenes didn't. So they're the four elements. Okay. Yesod, the next one up, is considered associated with, these are all planetary aspects we're getting to. Yesod, moon. Netzach, Mercury, sorry, Hood, Mercury. Netzach, Venus. Tiferet, the sun. Gebra, Mars. Chesed, Jupiter. Binah, Saturn. Chochmah, Uranus. Keter, Neptune. And Da'at is associated potentially with Pluto, both a planet and not one, there and not there, the furthest outer reaches of our solar system.
So that bottom one is
it's not bottom.
Oh,
you can't
sorry.
use that terminology with me. It's outer. I want you to keep thinking of this way. I want you to keep thinking of this as from the deepest inwards to the furthest outwards. This is a seed. This here is when it fruits, when we reach the height of summer. This could be considered as the depth of winter. This could be considered the heights of summer. Most people think of this diagram as up and down or in and out. I want you to destroy those concepts today, please, because they will be a trap to you. And when you look at them online, you're always going to see them as above, so below, but that's bullshit. Total fucking bullshit. Who teaches me this? I've been taught by things that are not human.
That's good. I was just checking on the name. That one.
Just
yep.
show me. This particular person here, is that who you want to know about? What do you want to know about them? What do you want to know about them?
Oh, sorry. I was muted. I just want to check their name.
Malkut. M-A-L-K-U-T-H.
Thank you.
The elements that make Earth. I'm going to take you on a speculative journey before we do finish with today. A speculative journey associated with the idea of evolution as we know it. Just the idea. Because nobody knows anything. That's it. The idea of evolution is we have a big bang, everything goes into, life goes instantaneously everywhere, matter goes instantaneously everywhere within a split second afterwards. Sooner or later, things start to potentially form orbits around certain matters of fusion or fission, depending on which way you want to look at it. But let's call our star as sun, shall we? Which is Tiferet, the center of our so-called galaxy. Now, not only is Tiferet the center of our so-called galaxy, Tiferet is each of you. Tiferet is each of you, and around you go these experiences. Okay? Tiferet is the center of the matter that's being under discussion, and around it are all the potentials that can relate to that matter under discussion. None of them are fixed. They're just circulating around in their own orbits. Each of them has their own personality, just like everybody in this room. But tarot, in this particular instance, we could say is Tiferet, because Tiferet is using me to be a mouthpiece at the moment for tarot. Okay. So let's say that Earth forms around our solar star, and that this is here. This is this little puppy here. All the elements that make up life right here. The moon then starts to affect tides. The moon either comes into the orbit. Yes, you can look at the books of the Reshkigal, you can look at the different books that have come out of the Middle East. They're very, very exciting, some of them. Particularly the Sumerian material. Anybody see that? You see it?
It's not readable.
Of course it's not. It's in Sumerian. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I can see something.
Doing my is the translations from the cuneiform dialect, okay, which is where the word Inanna comes from. Ishtar is Babylonian. That's much later. So that cuneiform, you would end up with things like this. That this is very multifaceted, and that if you get caught in the idea that this is just a tarot, you're going to be fucking losing the plot. This is much bigger than that. Okay, so Yesod, we're associated with the moon. Moon rules, it's got to do with the tides, the tidal pool, whatever. Therefore, we do associate this with water, and we can think with this concept of the moon here, Yesod, of single-cell creatures, sort of amphibian-like, heading towards. I'm cartooning it, I know. Heading towards the land. When the waters finally recede a little bit, volcanoes have stopped. It's rained. Fucking water everywhere, not a drop to drink. And some of us slither onto land. Well, ultimately, I have a flesh and blood body. There's a lot of me is water. This is not new water. I'm not made of new water. I'm made of ancient water. I'm made of water from before the Big Bang. But I am made of water from when Earth formed her one-cell creatures and we started to differentiate and come onto land. So we're talking a few million years here. And we're getting to the quickening now, historically, but that's okay. This is the only way that we can perceive evolution at the moment, historically. It'll be very different in 20,000 years and 100,000 years and 2.5 billion years, but it's been supposed by other people involved in this particular analysis as to represent the moment when we as a species harnessed or became befriended with fire. So you could think of the hearth fire or the campfire, or when the First Nation of this country, for example, clear a certain area with fire for regenerative processes. Where we got the knowledge from, that's another story. We'll get around to that. That's the art. That's fucking the art. That's right there, where it comes from. Okay, because we get seeded all the time, but I won't go there. All right, let's move across there to Netzach. Netzach is associated with Venus. This is where a good fuck comes from. Let's procreate, shall we? Let's know that a labia is much more than what we maybe thought it was. This is the concept of conception, the idea of matrilineal associations in here. It's everything fecund and juicy and luscious and intimate and yummy. Yes, a good fuck. From there, let's move across to this central theme. And if we're still on the idea of evolution, we're sort of now getting into the idea where things start to speed up, because things will speed up before they end up in a state of or flatline. They'll speed up those. So this central theme is called, interestingly enough, by other people, and I'll use it here today, and you can play around with that, the sphere of the sacrificed gods. Okay, do we need to spend time on this? Yes, just 2 minutes. We mentioned earlier in week 1 the word God. I used it once or twice with you, and I didn't really give you much more information. There is a piece I'll put up on our Facebook page so that you can read it through and understand it. It's got nothing to do with the idea of a deity, which is like the word God. The Greek word for God is demon or daemon, D-A-E-M-O-N, which is demon. And the jinn is the wind, is a certain wind. Okay? And when that certain wind comes, it can be like this wall of fucking sand coming, a wall. We've had them in Australia, we've had them lots of places. It's that huge dust wind that goes across to New Zealand, for example, to the mountains there and leaves a red stain all across the snow. That's called the jinn, D-J-I-N-N. How it's been translated, I could actually shit all over Jung and say Jung's responsible for this, for the humanization, but it's not a people. The human creation of images of deities into human looking. This is why Islam refuses or does not want to have images or even photographs, because they don't want a thought, a movement, a wild thing, a natural phenomenon to be trapped in the image of a man or a woman. Do you understand? And that's what happens. That's what's happened. And that's what's happened with a lot of the Abrahamic religions, is they have trapped the idea of wildness and certain points of weather and certain landmarks and certain way showers. They've trapped them into looking like that and calling them a god and a goddess and making them look like they were something we should bow down to. That's not what this is about. This is never what this is about. The Tufalet is the season of the sacrifice gods is, for example, in the Middle East, which through necessity or whatever else, people started eating grass approximately 10,500 years ago. Nowadays they call it grain and they think it's good for you, but we're the only mammal who eats grass. Fucking not good for us. But at the end of every cycle or season of growth, people then started harvesting the corn, harvesting the maize, harvesting, and that harvest was called the sacrifice of a deity, because it's come to fruition, it's come to its fulfillment, and then you cut it down. Whoever thought of that is, I mean, it makes me cross, but still, that's just personal. One dude here in the era when starvation must have ravaged the Middle East and the grain's been cut down, one dude has gone, I'm going to I've got a bit of surplus, I'm going to lock it up. So that person locks up the surplus, and the following year when the starvation is still going on, the people in the village come and say, hey, can you just feed us now? And the person goes, pay me the first banks. The first banks. And the first concept of hierarchy starts right here. The idea of better than or lesser than. If I've got more money than you, I'm better than you. You're just common. Just like we used to call land or Mother Earth. Okay, so this bastard's locked up the grain, everybody else is going hungry, but this person likes the feeling that happens when you achieve something. But in this particular instance, the achievement is a sense of power over. You with me? That sense of power over requires an army. Kabbalah. Planetary association is Mars. But the concept of army is really, really modern, because prior to that, the truer relationship of Mars to this particular instance is the baboon. Because baboons are remarkable people. Baboons move in a pack, place to place, and they need to protect themselves from lions. So what they do is they get all of the women who are gestational, and they get all of the young, and they get all of their elders in the middle, and they train their warrior caste. Their warrior caste, they don't gender differentiate. Their warrior caste circles them. They're trained to kill. But then there's four alphas, there's four silverbacks. Doesn't say gender, four silverbacks. And they actually, just like ravens, get at the four quarters of the group as the group moves. As the lion comes in, one of the baboons from the quarters will confront the lion while the other three circle the lion until the lion's scared off, because there's no way a lion can herd baboons. Baboons are just fucking awesome people. You with me? So the initial concept of Gevara, which is associated with Mars, was the defender of the people, the defender of your clan. This is the place where your puppy who attacks the door, whoever's knocking on the door, and your puppy barks, your puppy is defending you and their family. They are Geveric. Good old Geveric puppy. So once that's established there, and the person concerned is established a form of martial environment to protect the territory that they're in where they've locked up their grain, you then end up with a group of people who are discussing this. And that discussion is here in Chesed. Chesed, of course, is associated with Jupiter. And Jupiter has got to do with the concept of education, social standing. It's also got to do with religion, the idea of emancipation in some areas, but specifically to do with growth. So that as the population around the new magnate grows, because that's where a fortress is formed, and of course the king is the one who locked up his grain in the first place, and he's got all his guardians protecting him, nowadays called a military. And there's villages formed around the outside of all that, which is where everybody trades, etc., and interreacts from there. But being Jupiter is the planet of expansion. I'm getting to the point. We move from there. Then of course, as I mentioned before, Binah is associated with Saturn. Saturn is a planet that defines your limitations. Everybody keeping up? Good. Now, where we are, as far as an evolution is concerned, is between Hesed and Binah. All of which along the serpent line or the dragon line or the lightning flash, as it's also called, transits art, D-A'-ath, which is associated with the planet Pluto, which is called the Great Dissolver. These planets are called ambassadors of the galaxy. All your outer planets are Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. They're known as ambassadors of the galaxy. And what Uranus hasn't destroyed completely, Pluto will. Pluto turns it into its etheric sense of self. Now, what happens with, we don't know Pluto. Pluto is even among astrologers considered to be the most further in, the most inaccessible. What's happening here evolutionary wise is we're moving, if we could be said to be moving, because all things move from seed to to branch, to root, to stem, to leaf, to flower, to bud, to flower, to fruit, to seed. Yeah, so it goes through this cycle. Life goes through these cycles. Okay, every tree goes through these cycles. This is the area which is a shocker. And why is it a shocker? Because the art represents something that is not known. Just like Pluto, the art represents that which is extraordinary. It's where something becomes known that's never been known before. Okay? So who here was born before 1940? Anybody? Didn't think so. Okay. So we'll just stick with the fact that we're a certain generation in a sea of shifting baseline syndrome, which we did talk about last week, so you know what that is. Jupiter is a planet of expansion. What do we know about our society? Too many fucking people. And they're all getting fat. And there's too many products on the shelves. And there's too much waste. And there's too many piles and piles of detritus in Manila where the children are dancing over the top of all the mercury. And everybody's trying to get the next thing up, the next thing up, and the next thing up. And you're known to be, the bigger your house, the better. Isn't that the way the saying goes? If you're living in a mud hut, you're cheap. But what's also happening here with Hesed, which is associated with Jupiter, the planet of expansion, people are getting fatter and fatter and fatter. And they're given more and more and more information. You see, this is where we are. So right now we're transiting to art on the way to Binah, which is contraction, which is security cameras, control, manipulation, registration, keeping it under wraps, keeping it in a certain kind of a paradigm. Everything has to be fitted, and things are getting smaller and smaller and smaller in Binah, which is where groups become fractured and fractured and fractured and fractured and fractured. People stop being people. They become men and women, socialites, celebrities, LGBTQI, dwarves, people in wheelchairs, people with disabilities, people with mental illnesses, people who work in HR. Can you hear the divisionism? Okay, so that is Binah, planet of contraction. But as Binah says, I am not limitation. I define your limitations. And mathematically, in the dictionary, a limit is a thing that you look like you're going towards, but you can never reach. An athlete, for example, who's seeking to go 1 second faster when they do a sprint that has ever been done before. Okay, so evolutionary wise, that's where we are. Contractions, you could call these safes. Bina is where you close everything and you shut the fucking prison door. But then something comes like a fucking rocket from the art, and it's coven, people. In your lifetime, this is meant to be. This is natural. This is what generates the tree. This is the quickening. And we are experiencing that now. I am super excited. This is why all the hyperbole that's occurring across media is completely irrelevant. Vaccinated or non-vaccinated is completely irrelevant. It's how we really focus ourselves through this process. This process could last 2.5 million years. This process could last another 10,500 years. We don't know when the next generation of people are that will experience thalidomide, that will experience the 1919 Spanish flu, for example. We don't know the next experience of the so-called Black Plague. These are all art. So these could all, you could, if you wanted to, if you had 10 lifetimes, sit down and with what you know of history, write down the number of regenerations that have occurred historically. And fascinatingly, Genesis, the book of Genesis, marks them. For example, the book associated with Noah and the flood, there's just a few people left, and they spread out across the world. Eden with Adam and Eve, just a few people left and they spread out across the world. The idea of Sodom and Gomorrah, you've got a few people left and they got spread out. What each of these stories does is say, when it gets too big, life will make it smaller. And we'll begin again. Now, this is what happens when you theoretically form as a fruit from your father's tree. You seem smaller. When you start to learn anything, it seems overwhelming. And the more comfortable you become with the wisdom or the knowledge or the practicalities of making your fucking box, in the end, you can call yourself a carpenter. Do you understand what I'm getting to so far? This is mysticism, people. You can't work with tarot unless you understand the mysteries, at least a little bit, of where this has come from, to show you a more expansive picture of yourselves and your lives and what's actually going around you, so that you don't buy into the bullshit. Okay. From this particular sphere known as Bina, we go across. Okay, this is where the cruciform cross comes in. It was mentioned earlier by Danger. I think it was Danger mentioned the cruciform cross. You see that there? That's called the cruciform cross. This triad at the top leading down, it's called the cruciform cross. This Chokmah, that path, believe it or not, between Bina and Chokmah is associated with the Empress card, or the seer in the newer book, but it's traditionally called the Empress card. You right? You with me? You got that? Okay. The interesting part about the Empress card, each of the major arcana, each of the pictographic cards has a letter associated with that. Remember we said this is the art here, first or firster? So the letter associated with the Empress card path is Dolet, D-A-L-E-T-H, which means door. It's an Empress card, fecundity, sensuality, eating really nourishing food, licking the salt off somebody's body, patting a horse. All of that is associated with Venus and the Empress card. Yes? So that particular line there is also associated with Bina, with Netzach, this little circle here that's connected with Venus, and the same thing of sensuality and eroticism and beauty. And that can be a vast old growth forest, a savanna. Yes, it could also be the skin you've spun off of a fox and used for your children's hands, as they do in Mongolia with the eagles. So that sphere there, which is Chokmah, is called It's associated with Uranus or Uranus, and it's called the sphere of the zodiac. I think it was Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. How's that for dragging it out of the fucking archive somewhere? Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young wrote a song called After the Gold Rush. Anybody remember that song? If not, have a little listen. The song itself is symbolic of
Neil
that
Young.
journey.
It was Neil
After
Young that did that one.
Flying Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home. Okay, so I am one person who knows that there is great joy in what's happening. In the midst of devastation is always the expansion into the next phase through the recognition and acknowledgement of what's actually happening. We don't move if we think of it as just man-made. We don't move if we think that somebody like fucking George Bush or whatever has got all the power. We don't move. We don't understand the groundswell. The groundswell is the imminence of this whole thing. The continuous imminence, this vast forest of this whole thing. Then what happens come this area Keter, which is associated with Neptune? Fucking nobody knows. I don't know. Nobody knows. You can have read about Neptune and think you fucking know, but unless you've actually lived through the evolutionary process, you're not going to know. It's all guesswork. Now, once we look at all this, I'll get you to do something. We're going to just finish off with you starting to do something else again. Borrowing the pen. Borrowing the pen. Okay, so I'll leave that to the side for a moment. We'll come back to this before we finish. You see that? Make it clearer. Can you see that? Yeah? Can you see that? Okay, I'm just going to do something else. I'm just going to this is rough. So I kind of did a little one there, yeah? Yeah? Okay, so I'm going to take any circle. And I'm going to do another one off it. And then I'll take any circle of that. I'll do another one off it. Okay. You're going to be doing this. You're going to be doing this. Okay. And then what you're going to do is realize that the whole thing is in one circle. And that one circle is called Malkut. So there are 10 spheres with a potential 11 all inside of one. This is the pattern inside of the seed. There's only ever one. Ones and zeros make up a binary communication tool that powers all computer systems on a worldwide level. Ones and zeros, people, have a look. Have a look. We are looking at a computerized, technological, advanced system that could be thousands of years before it actualizes itself. But it's also potentially thousands of years in any direction from a center. And nobody knows where that center is. So all you've got is you. And that makes you the center of this image. It also makes you every other sphere on this image, but it specifically makes you Malkut. Because in a weird kind of way, there's nothing manifest prior to Malkut, so all the rest of this is bullshit. Even though I can look at it as an evolutionary process, the truth is, I'm still here, I'm just writing and the fucking computer's telling me what I should and shouldn't do. Oh, there it is, don't need that. Okay, so. What are you doing? Go away. Okay, so, excuse me, just done a thing. Right, so that top sphere, or that most inner sphere, Keta. Keta is absolute. Keta is absolute. A-T-Z-I-L-U-T-H. This is what we worked on last week. Yeah, Keta is absolute. A-T-Z-U-L-I-L-U-T-H. Yeah? This whole central area here is the absolute. Keta, Bina, and Chokmah form Briah. B-R-I-A-H. Remember that? All still in the thinking process. They're all doing the mathematical process. It's all trying to work it out by finding your research. This whole central area is called Yetzirah. They're the ingredients that make up. Each of us has got things like skin cells and hearts and lungs and mitochondria. Yeah? That's what that is in a body. In an environment, it is a mother forest that's got nothing chopped down. So Ezekiel's idea of destroying the Asherah tree didn't work, did it? Because we're all here. You get what I'm getting about that historical information? We're still all here. So therefore, it was not possible that Ezekiel destroyed the Asherah. Okay. This one here, the most outer aspect of this is a sire, which is also / Malkut. Because it's the only place anything is manifest. This is when the seed sprouts those first two little leaves and the first tiny little threads of roots. It's when the seed cracks open a little bit to show that there's nothing inside except forever. Nothing except forever. But if I'm looking at this with tarot, and I've got cards on each of these places, which I will do, okay, I'm interested in what's going on if a magician card falls in the sphere of Tiferet. What's happening if a person's got the devil card in the sphere of Yesud? What kind of cancer have they got? Have they got cancer of the bowel? Have they got cancer of the uterus? Have they got sexually transmitted disease? Have they got AIDS? There's your shoulders. There's your head. There's your throat. There's your gut. There's your genitals. There's your fucking knees and feet. This is called the body of Adam Kadmon. We mentioned this last week. The body of Adam Kadmon, that's this. And there are also three aspects. When we look at the body, this top section, which is going to be, we're almost finished with the day. I'm fucking running out of steam. This top section is called the Neshama. N-E-S-C-H-A-M-A-H. Where's Ari? Thank you, Ari. This entire middle section that includes part of the Yesud, not all of it. I'll leave you speculate whether it's the bottom or the top, or maybe just a consideration of the Yesud. It's called the Ruach, R-U-A-C-H. And this one section at the bottom, which includes probably just a tiny little lick of Yesod is called the Nefesh. Nephesh. Nefesh. Together, that forms the body of Adam or the eternal tribe. We said this, we told you last week what that's called. The eternal tribe. Adam Kadmon is red earth, the eternal tribe. Knowing this first before you go putting fucking cards on the top of it is meant to open this up. Each of these here is also associated with a number, but the numbers could be anywhere. For the sake of what we're going to do next week, which is part of this, of numerology, for the sake of it, we're going to say that Malkut is number 1. Yesod is number 2. Hud is 3. Netzach is 4. Tiferet is 5. Geburah is 6. Hesed is 7. Binah is 8. Chokhmah is 9. Kete is 10. And art is a speculative 11. A speculative 11, because we don't know everything. No matter what we think we know, we don't know everything. So when we get on to doing numerology, you are going to need all this. You are also going to need it when you're working. I call this map in the newer book the Stargate, because most people call it the tree of life, and when they call it the tree of life, they just see it as up and down. They fuck up every time. Every which way you look, all over the internet. Have a look this week. Now, Kabbalah is spelled in several different ways. It's C-A-B-A-L-A. Call you in Ari to write these down. Kabbalah. K-A-B-A-L-A. K-A-B-B-A-L-A-H. Q-B-L-H. Q-B-B-L-H. Q-A-B-B-A-L-A-H. It's also called Otzchim. O-T-Z-C-H-I-I-M. Double I. Thank you. So any which one of them you go looking up, you're going to find something deeply occidentally religious and outrageously limiting. But we are talking about systems that want to control other systems. And it's actually silly. It's so silly. There's nothing and anybody can control anything. This is why the idea of making a box, so that you could come to the conclusion or the understanding that the box is making you, or each part of the box is coming together collaboratively for a reciprocal community gathering. If we place anything in a state of being more important than any other thing, and by the way, the word thing is a Nordic word that means gathering of warriors. I think you ought to know that about any word, any expression called the TH in it. This is why in Ireland, for example, which was never conquered by the Norse people, the person will go, I'm talking about me toot. And I'm going, what? Me toot, me teat. Me teat are giving me a hard time. And Helen in Galway. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. She said, me teat. Because an unconquered people can't say TH. For example, certain Londoners will say bothered and thing. And we put them down. We go, you arrogant, you fucking losers, you undignified plebeians, whatever. You can't say thing. Just means they haven't been conquered. Because our glottis works through the connectedness it's got with the weaving of many languages, works. It won't work properly if we haven't got them. It will work differently with people who haven't been conquered. Therefore, anybody who speaks a second language beside the language which is your so-called native language, kudos. But this is where we're going to stop this week, because it's getting a bit on the late side. Any questions you've got, please let me know. One other thing that I'd like you to imagine. This is very significant. Absolute, we could also call number 1. Because if you wanted to, you could screw this up in a fucking ball and throw it for your cat. It actually needs to be. That's kabbalah. Okay, so keta is also called 1. Chokmah is considered as 2. And bina is considered as 3. But I want to show you something. That's 1. That's 2. When it becomes a closed system, it becomes life. Life is possible because life is not possible until the system closes back in on itself. So 1 is energetic, 2 is energetic only, but when a third factor is involved, you have life, and that could be a human infant, or it could be a vast galaxy. You with me? And that's called neshama on the tree, so that involves bina and chokmah and keta, yes? Just so you know. Because when we get into shapes, and you've got a lot of 4s in your chart, if you've got a lot of 4s in your chart next week and you see this box, you're going to wonder whether or not it traps you or whether it supports you. Because if it supports you, it's the strongest fucking thing ever. If it traps you, it's because you're caught in dogma. We've got a lot to cover next week. That's all we've got time for today, people. Any questions at the end of the day? Any quick questions? We've got 5 minutes for questions.
You'll post it up as soon as you can, so I can go over it.
Yeah, and can
Obviously.
we have access to the site too? Some of us aren't on your Facebook site.
None of this. This is the difficulty with this is why we call it. I apologize, but this is why we call it the advanced tarot class. Okay, because you can't get this from books. You can't get it from books. I never learned this from books. I came close to writing it in the first book, tarot book, and the second one, advanced tarot, but it's not in any book. This is an oral learning. You're supposed to remember.
I think she meant in the video. Can we look at it again?
Yeah,
I'm going to put the video up for the week.
Unedited though. It's
Unedited.
fine.
I'm just
It's
going to fuck
fine.
it up.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
that's great. I love
do
it.
it.
And could some of us have access to the Facebook site? Because I think a lot of us are not on it as yet.
Okay, I don't know why you're not, but it's like, just let me know. Just send me a private message, and that's pretty much it.
We tried to open the link, but we were told we can't.
But what I'd like you to do between now and then is not think of the Facebook page. If you want to come in, you just got to let me know that you're not in. Okay, I'm fine with you yelling at me, Tasha. I'm fine with that. I'm loving it a little bit. I'm like, oh, I won't fire up. But what's all? Look at Lily doing the snuggle down there. I do it. Look, yeah, us two next. Please draw the diagram in your grimoire after we finish the work today. Please also make a note of every title, name, number so far. Please do not precede the work by thinking you know what's what afterwards, because we're going to cover that. Yeah, just one thing at a time, and just suck the fuck out of every single bit each week, Because when we get around to tarot, this will have worked itself through your system. It really will. And then, for example, in 3 weeks' time or 4 weeks' time, when I'm talking about netsuck, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. If I say, for example, there's an eight of pentacles just turned up netsuck, what's that mean? You're going to go, oh, that person's a prostitute. Yeah, okay. Is it a good sex worker? Hey, right, that's fine. It could also be somebody who sells lingerie or somebody who sells Lamborghinis as well, because they're still sex symbols. If it falls in the sphere of netsuck, you're going to know that's what it's called. Yeah? If there's a 7 of cups, it's like somebody who sort of like gets an imagination and jerks off to a computer screen, for example. Okay, all kinds of possibilities, but unless this original information sinks into you like a really nice massage oil, the rest of it is just going to be surface shit and you won't be able to pull on. And what happens back? Oh, that's the scary bit. The scary bit is something is listening to you learning.
Well, that's a nice drop in the ocean, isn't it?
So, Laura, I have a question in regards to that.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in my original notes from 2001, when we were looking at the art at that point in time, we also had Chiron
I've
listed.
moved it. I've
Okay,
changed my
that's
mind.
what I wanted to know. Oh, really?
Yes.
I got to update my grimoires, huh?
You've got to update your grimoire. Yeah.
Well,
and
you
then
also
work out
have-
why I've changed it.
You also had the pentagram there, which I don't know whether you were going to bring later on.
No, we'll discuss that just for a second. If you draw it, I draw it. Okay, just for the sake of it. I'll do that drawing. Okay. Most people think that's like a symbol of witches, yeah? That's okay. But the cool people wear it. But you know what it is? It's called the 5 ellipses of Venus. And what it actually really looks like.
Can you use a dark pen so that we can actually see it? If you're drawing like a dark one, like a texter.
Like a
Or a
Sharpie
Sharpie.
text.
Oh, Sharpie.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, it's what you need.
It's happening. This is when it's like, see, just while we're waiting, if I was to do that, sort of, and you didn't know that it was a piece of paper, it could look like a line, could look like a line, couldn't it?
Yeah.
But when I do that, it's completely different. So if I was to put a dot on the thing, say for example, thank you, darling. Say for example, I was to, just very briefly. Okay, so let me just do this mind fuck with you. That's the word it. IT. Okay. That's how I've written it. And I've written it like that on purpose. Okay, because you see that little dot? Like the dot in the middle of the page? If I was to turn that letter I that way, and I look down the middle of it, it would be that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If I was to get that line there that crosses the T and turn it on its side and look down it, it would be that, wouldn't it? So what's in the very middle of the T? It's that, isn't it? If I got that line there and I was to look down it, in the middle of it, it would be that. But that there could be that. But in actuality, it could also be that. Mad genius moment? Is it? I'm actually not fucking with you. It seems like what the fuck is all on, but I'm not. Okay, I'm going to draw Venus again.
It's almost 2 a.m. here, so anything you say will feel like you're fucking with us.
That's Venus. How is that possible? Because I'm closer in space to this. It's exactly the same drawing, but one of them is so far out into space that the cycle looks like a point. Can you see? I'm so far in space that the cycle looks like a point, but when you get closer, you can see that the ellipses around the sun. So these are the 5 ellipses of Venus around the sun. Okay? Many things that you may have been taught are modern, they're recent, and they come out of that fucktard called Gerald Gardner, or the people like Elias Levi, and Robert Flood, Alistair Crowley, Arthur Red Waite, blah, 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 the old boys club. Okay? Nobody needs that. And nobody needs to know that this is hidden information. For example, somebody earlier talked about I can't see you, but that doesn't matter. But yes, it was you, Lily. You were in the room. And you're talking about it being a box. Yes? Yeah. Okay. That's really, I was thrilled when you said that. And I'll explain that particularly also up to that. Okay, with the whole concept of geometry, the mathematics of architecture was kept hidden like a really powerful secret by the Masonic orders. Because in most Indigenous communities, except for the longhouse, they're roundhouses. Yeah. The idea of the straight line in geometry started a form of madness. And it's really interesting. What's his name? John Young, who I put up John Young's video called Earth Talk for you to have a look at during the week. John Young trained with the Kalahari. And the Kalahari, when a house was built nearby where the Kalahari lived, the elders went into absolute horror because everybody who goes into a square house comes out mad. Yeah. There is something intrinsically problematic about living in a coffin or in a box, isn't there? And the boxes that separate us are really terrible. I think of the towers here in Melbourne. They're upright coffins. They're just boxes, 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 boxes. Everything stacks well on the box. Nothing is organic. Nothing can fall naturally if it's in a box. It's enclosed. It's contained. It's controlled. Yes, except for the fact that we then have a tsunami, and that fucks that up. Yes, so I'm watching humanity at the moment attempting to control COVID. COVID is a life form. COVID has their time to level out humanity, because if we took the concept of Pachamama, and I do, no matter what anybody thinks I do, I'll take this first. The idea of Earth being, some people will call it the Gaia hypothesis. Pachamama is a South American word for Earth Mother. There are many, many word names for this, but without recognition of reciprocity in how we interrelate with Earth. If we don't interrelate well, we become chesedic, which is what's happening on that tree, where we just get fatter and fatter and fatter, because nobody's got to hunt their food, do they? Or some of us do. Get fatter and fatter and fatter, and when we get fatter and fatter and fatter, we get sicker and sicker and sicker, and all of a sudden Pachamama goes, we're just going to bring about a bit of a virus, which is, we have every virus that we can imagine on the blockchain about DNA and RNA. They're always there all the time. And sometimes they bloom because it's the season of their blooming. And this fear of death is just odd, because nothing dies. And this is also what I'm hoping you get your heads around, or you get, that makes sense, because what will happen with Kabbalah, it's a beautiful phenomenon, it starts to burrow into you. What I'm teaching here is going to start to infiltrate your dreams, affect the way you touch things, affect the way you look at things, affect the way you think about what you're being taught. It starts to burrow into you and transform you from the center out. Whether you'll come to not fear things like COVID, it's like, this is even my daughter yesterday, she said, what is this about vaccination? I said, vaccination or no vaccination, what's it got to do with you? I don't tell you who I fuck. I'm not about to tell you whether I get what I get a needle for, or whether or not I go and change my diaper every day. It's not necessarily anybody else's business, but it's becoming a big populist thing. And that again is too ascetic to get me. It's too expansive. It's just, it crushes us, which has been bringing us in. It crushes us. We're crushed by too much information. We're crushed by this continuous pressure, and by the scrutiny and the police all dressed in black with black armor. But mate, I can tell you, no shit, this was predicted in a book that I wrote called Genesis. Has each one of those circles has 4 worlds. And with each of those worlds is almost like in another whole world, so that you may have 10 Sephirot, and each of them is made up of 4 worlds, and therefore you have 40 worlds. But if you add them, if you've read, I mean, anybody got hold of Death Forever yet? You got it, Tanya? Okay. Death Forever talks, you got it, Artemis? Death Forever talks about light. The number of light is 10 to the 40th. Just let that sink in. It's 10 with a little 40 up the top.
Wow.
That's this. Nobody knows where this science came from. You got it, Tanya? Okay. Death Forever talks, you got it, Artemis? Death Forever talks about light. The number of light is 10 to the 40th. Just let that sink in. It's 10 with a little 40 up the top.
Wow.
That's this. Nobody knows where this science came from. When they try and box it in and control it through a religion, they're not understanding that this is life itself, herself, themselves, the whole works. There's 4 worlds, and there's 4 worlds that's from Absolute, Baraya, Yetzirah, and Asaya. In each one of those Sephirot, and each one of those Sephirot has 10 more. And each one of those 10 has 4 worlds, and each one of those 4 worlds has 10 more Sephirot. You're looking at eternity.
Regeneration.
Regeneration. Every cell in your body. You're looking at the moment sperm and ovum complete. You're looking at the first time a cell separates. And you're also looking at the full fucking tree. And this is where the understanding of ancestral knowledge from an indigenous people is so important. And so is non-literate culture. This capacity, Kabbalah means from mouth to ear. So I can't teach you by giving you a book. What's the fucking point of having these workshops? If I can't remember and know all this, I know all this. I know about this, but I've been working with it almost my whole life. And I didn't know about this when I first started learning. What happens after a period of time is that this particular entity called Kabbalah begins to teach you itself. Something happens, and you start to then think around the edges of the corners in difference to the way you might have thought about it before if nobody showed you or nobody told you. And when that happens, the trigger to do with you as a movable, malleable capacity to read cards is just part of this. But everything will change beforehand, because you're all here, because you're all in a collective, because you can ask each other questions, because you'll learn to remember this. Please remember every bit of it. And if you need to talk with among yourselves, do so, but without knowing each other too much, because at the moment, like I said before, please don't know each other. Yeah, we'll get to feel each other, but we can never know each other. But so if we start to read for each other, at least there'll be a slight I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, because we're not in the same room with each other. But I'm up for the experiment. I'm up for the whole worldwide thing that we're doing right now. Okay. So please learn as much as you can of this pattern for next week. Yep. Any other questions?
Laura, can I ask, do you have any suggestions of, like, I want to read more about this Ezekiel story because I'm just trying to, like, I don't know, I feel like there's more that I would like to know if there's any.
What do you want? What's your question?
Do you have any books or anything that you recommend?
No.
To read about it? Or, no?
This is word of mouth. You won't get it from a book.
Yeah, but like, I mean, the Ezekiel story in particular, like, you've been suggesting books here and there. So.
Yeah, but that won't have to do with anything I'm teaching you as such.
Mm-hmm.
Their ways of thinking, they're also going to affect you by the way other people have thought. For example, the concept of schooling, the movie Schooling the World by Arnie Deaconess. Did I mention that one before?
No.
Last week. Ari, you still there?
Yep, I'm here.
Are you able to find the movie Schooling the World, the link to that?
Okay, I'll have a look.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll put it in.
Thanks, Ari.
He's getting it for us.
And so you touched on the little drop in the ocean about someone is listening.
About what?
Someone is listening.
Yes.
Yeah. So, any advice there?
Well, life is listening. Right?
Isn't that the
Life is not
reciprocity?
necessarily what you think it is. It's not us and everything else. There's more to it, and it does come down to no one can get close to it. And I think the closest a person can get is if they do DMT. As an example. There's that link. You can grab hold of that link. Thank you, Ari. So that your thinking is affecting, is flooding your body. Your synapses are all flooding your body with different hormones in different ways. And don't think for a moment that you haven't got on your knee. You've got a cell on your knee. In that cell, there are vast numbers of atoms. Each of those atoms has a nucleus. Each of those nuclei have electrons going around them in vast quantities. We don't know if those electrons actually are the ellipses of planets around a sun. And if one of the ellipses of those planets around that sun contains this Earth with us on it,